there's a lot of reasons for why a person could procrastinate, and it can be different than someone else. So by getting clear on the specific point of struggle, by defining the problem, at what moment do you start feeling overwhelmed or procrastinating or feeling lazy or whatever words you use? Everybody uses something else. What is the thing that at that moment you're like, I can't do this, or this is too hard, right?
Okay.
That is defining the problem, and that's the problem you want to solve. You don't need to take like a whole productivity course. You need to solve that thing, and then not just podcasting will go easy for you, but all other areas of your life will also, because you're not just putting out a tip for podcasting, right? Like sometimes we learn tips and hacks, and it's like just for podcasting, which is great because it's making podcasting easier, but that way we could also implement it in all other areas.
If you are a female Christian entrepreneur or life coach, you need a podcast. And if you have a podcast, you need a podcast coach. Finding a supportive and empowering community is key to podcaster success. Through my holistic approach as a trained life coach and my experience in the podcast industry since 2016, I want to encourage you weekly through answering your podcasting questions. I'm cheering for you, and your voice matters. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Holistic Podcasting. I am your podcast coach, Kristin Chadwick, and I am here today with a lovely brain coach. You guys, I'm so happy to be talking all nerdy with ST Rapport. So welcome to the show, and I am so excited to nerd out with you today and really unpack the procrastination that I will start to see with some of my podcasters. And we're going to just really pull the veil back and walk through how we can get past the procrastination. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Kristin. I'm really excited for this.
Yay. Awesome. Okay, we're going to dive right into the meat of this, because I think what you have to share, you guys, you have to go check out her TikToks, her podcast, Life Picks University, because she has so much valuable information that is quick and full of meat. And she has an assessment for you too that she can talk about at the end. But I want to start with basics of what is cognitive function and why does it matter for a podcaster?
Yes. So thinking is actually not one big thing. Thinking is made up of 28 parts, 28 thinking skills, also called cognitive functions. I like to think of it as the center of the web. In the center of the web is those cognitive functions, are those thinking skills. And coming out of the center is all the activities you do as a podcaster, as a business owner, as a mom, whatever you're doing, right? You are using cognitive function in order to do those tasks. Now, naturally, some of them are going to be stronger and some of them are going to be weaker. But those weaker ones are causing you to procrastinate or are making certain things really hard for you to do.
Okay. Can you unpack some of those processes of the weaker and the stronger sides? What does that look like?
Yeah, so there's no such a thing as having a perfect cognitive function, because you can always improve all of them. But if one is really weak, it's going to make it hard for you to do it. So I'll give you an example. One of the cognitive functions is called clear perception, or when it's weak, it's called blurred and sweeping perception. This is being able to take in information in a clear and organized manner. So if you want to make a plan for your podcast and how you are going to grow it more, you have these 100 ideas, I could do this and I could do that, and you're learning all these things, but there's so much information that you don't know where to start. So you can do two things. First one is use your five senses, because this is how our brain takes in information, and ask yourself, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I taste? Right? And getting all the information in clearly. And more simply, you could even just ask yourself, what is the starting point? Where do I need to start? What is the first step of my plan? Right? That usually opening a laptop, literally, don't even think about being able to all deep inside it. Literally open your laptop. Right? Open a Google Doc to make your plan. Then what is the next step? What is the next step? And then your brain isn't getting isn't having information overload and can actually start thinking.
That's so good. I love that you just brought it to really simple of open up your laptop because that is so true. Like we forget that that is a decision in the next step of just open it up. And even like, as we were talking about procrastination with our podcast, whether that's pressing record, whether that's for the first time ever, or it's pressing record, 6 months down the road and you're like, I don't know what content to do. Like, what's the very first step? Is it sitting down in your office? Is it opening up the Google Doc or something like that? So I love that. That's good. That's good. Okay. So what would be the next like process? Are we getting that clear thought,
Clear
right?
perceptions.
Clear
Yeah.
perceptions. Okay.
Yeah. So thinking is actually divided into 3 phases. We have the first phase, input, where we take in the information. The second phase is elaboration, where we process it. And output is the third phase, where we tell the world we know what we know. When you are talking into your mic and sharing with your audience, whatever you want to share with them, you are in the output phase. Now, we don't actually always go in order. Sometimes we jump around and we go through. But for the most part, when you're trying to improve your thinking abilities so that way you don't procrastinate and you actually get things done, you're working in those orders. So in the first phase, we have, right, the clear perception. It could also be labeling, using the right names for things. Like, how many times have you said this or that, or like put this there and then nobody understood what you're talking about, or they thought you meant on the left side and you meant on the right side and you spent like 2 hours trying to look for it, right? Giving things the right name, the right label. This is also going to be easier for your audience to understand you. When you're using precise labels, they can actually implement what you're trying to talk to them. So by you improving your cognitive functions, you're making it easier for your audience also.
Man, that's like revolutionary to me because I have actually thought about how many times I'll say this or that, even in text messages to friends. I'm like, why do I say that so much? I'm not clear on what I'm saying, which is so, okay, my mind just exploded a little bit. So you'll have to forgive me. Whoa. Okay. All right.
No, that's so good. Yeah, you're going to love this story. Now I work only with entrepreneurs, but when I started a couple years back, I was working with children. And there was this kid in 5th grade who could not understand a sentence, could not remember the second sentence. By the time you told him, like by the time he got the second sentence, he forgot the first one. And teachers and parents were going crazy because they're like, he can't remember anything, right? Like every day they had to reteach him everything. And he comes to me the first day and he's using a lot of vague words. He's using this and that. And when I would ask him, what's this? He couldn't explain it. He couldn't express it. But I knew that he was like pointing and I knew he understood what we were talking about. So I realized we were actually, his weakness wasn't memory. His weakness was actually labels because his brain didn't put things on labels. It just had a big pot, a big mush. Anytime you told him something, it went into the pot. It didn't get organized and go on labels and then being able to be like pulled out when he needed it. So he couldn't remember, not because he couldn't remember, but he couldn't use the labels in order to express it. So like 2 weeks of doing labeling exercises, he was like totally fine in class because it was that thing that he needed to be able to remember what he needed to remember.
Wow. That is so cool. And I wish I could just come and sit next to him and be like, please teach me how to do that.
Yeah, well, at home, okay, maybe it will take you a bit more than 2 weeks. And 2 weeks is fast. Like, it doesn't usually happen in 2 weeks. But if you're just conscious, like, even just like walk around for 5 minutes in the morning and just like point around things in your house. This is a book. This is a kitchen. This is like, get very specific. You're just going to train your brain to be more conscious about it. And when you start talking and you type this, you're like, hey, is there a different word I can use instead of this? Right.
Yes.
And it will take a couple weeks, but you'll get there. Soon it'll be natural and you won't think about it anymore.
That is amazing. And I just said that, but I really like, you can just take this to even podcasting because podcasting was not a natural ability for me when I started, and it still is really hard cognitively for me to voice what is going on inside of my brain. And so that right there will be so helpful, just having that clear perception and using that exercise for somebody who is, I always say like I'm an internal processor. And so it doesn't come out like how it's going on in my brain. So even this could help a podcaster, including myself, walking around the house and saying, that is a rusty colored blanket, or that is a hairy dog sitting right next to me instead of this or that. That's awesome. Okay, so you mentioned 3 parts. So the first one was the labeling. The second is, or no, input. Sorry. See, I'm learning right now. So first was input.
You're doing great.
Second was tell me the second one again.
Yeah, it's elaboration, the processing of it. Yeah.
Okay. And what does that look like?
That is the actual processing. So once you have the information in your brain, then how are you processing it? How are you understanding it? And what's going to be your next steps? So there's many cognitive functions, many thinking skills in that phase. One of them is defining the problem, getting really clear on the problem, right? Like how many times do we try solving it? We're saying like, okay, we're going to grow the podcast, so we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but it's not the real problem for your podcast. So you're using all this effort and trying to improve this thing, but really the problem's something else. And only after a few months of doing it and seeing you're getting no results, you're like, hey, I maybe need to reevaluate this. If you would reevaluate it first and define the problem first, then it will be much easier for you.
So what would be an example of that? So if it's not the growing of the podcast, what would be defining the problem? Like if you had a podcaster in front of you that was really struggling with procrastination, what would be like defining the real problem underneath that?
Yeah. So first we would have to get clear, right? So we're going to want to take in all the information and we're going to ask them just like, where are you struggling? What is the point in which you're struggling? Because procrastination is a really big word. There's a lot of reasons for why a person could procrastinate, and it can be different than someone else. So by getting clear on the specific point of struggle, by defining the problem, at what moment do you start feeling overwhelmed or procrastinating or feeling lazy or whatever words you use? Everybody uses something else. What is the thing that at that moment you're like, I can't do this, or this is too hard, right?
Okay.
That is defining the problem, and that's the problem you want to solve. You don't need to take like a whole productivity course. You need to solve that thing, and then not just podcasting will go easy for you, but all other areas of your life will also, because you're not just putting on a tip for podcasting, right? Mm-hmm. Like sometimes we learn tips and hacks and it's like just for podcasting, which is great because it's making podcasting easier, but that way we could also implement it in all other areas.
Okay. So it could be like you're stuck on a mindset of like what you just said was, this is too hard, or I don't know how to express what I have learned in a productive way, or yeah. Go ahead.
So the second example that you said is accurate, right? By saying, I don't know what to express, that is the point of struggle. That is why it is hard for you to do it, because it's not that you don't know what to say. It's that you're struggling to actually express it. By just saying it's too hard, you're being very vague. What part of it is hard? And you might have to ask that question multiple times for yourself. And you could even ask it like, if you want to even go deeper on the expressive part, you could go at what point do you find it struggle with to say? Is it right in the beginning, and once you have the first sentence, you have everything else? Is it like midway that you just like get mixed up with like your order of what, right? Like what is the point of struggle for you?
That is so fascinating and so revealing. It like makes you really be aware of the process of your thinking. So that is mind-blowing. So I encourage you, this is helpful for me, and I know it's going to be helpful for other podcasters out there to really hone in, like you were saying, on where is that specific moment that you get tripped up of, okay, we're going to dig into that. Okay, so one thing that I struggle with is the third part, is the output. So I would love to talk about that, where we, especially as an internal processor, have a hard time getting it out of our mouth and out of our brain. So can you walk through, like if you were coaching me, what would you say to somebody who is stuck in the output mode?
Yeah. So once again, in the output mode, there are multiple cognitive functions. So there could be different reasons for why it's struggling for you. So I would ask you, at what point in the output phase, and that, like when you're trying to see what you want to say, does it feel really challenging?
I would say, like right at the beginning of like, how do I want to put my thoughts together? to make it sound like it makes sense.
Yes, that would probably come from giving a thoughtful response is like the answer. We want to explain something without giving like too many details, but it also has to like be clear. Now my another question I have for you, is it easier for you if you do it in one mode versus the other versus let's say speaking or talking, like writing or things like that?
Writing is definitely easier.
Right. Okay. So now comes the fun part.
Okay.
We have what's called short-term strategies and long-term strategies.
Okay.
Short-term strategies are to help you right now. You need to record a podcast today and you need to be able to express yourself today. So you're going to have a short-term strategy to help you right now express yourself. For this situation, if you have a much easier time writing, what would be like the obvious solution? Write the basic points of your podcast out before you record it because that's much easier for you. Now, this is helpful because it helps us move throughout our day and helps us get the things done. But it's not actually solving the problem of being able to just being able to talk, right?
Okay.
That is going to come to our long-term strategies where it's going to take more effort to actually implement what we're trying to do, but will eventually make you not need the short-term strategy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? So your long-term strategy would be very conscious about in times where it doesn't make a difference. So when you're not on the mic and you are talking with your family and your friends and it's chilled and it's fine if you mess things up and you say things in a jumble, take a few extra seconds to try to express yourself, to try to see how can I say this in a clear way. So there's no pressure, right? What happens is we have double pressure, one of trying to explain it clearly and two of trying to record the podcast. Mm-hmm. So none of it works. Yeah. When we do it in a chilled way, then by automatically doing that enough times over enough weeks, you'll see that in podcasting will happen much easier.
Okay. So practice makes perfect, right? Or I should say practice makes better. And we're, like you said at the beginning, we're always growing in our cognitive abilities. That's so good. Okay. I love that you gave a short-term strategy for those like, well, I have to get this done today. And for anybody who is in that similar boat, the writing, I think, would be helpful for me. So maybe for somebody else, it could be doing a voice memo of like a brief summary of what you want to talk about and then going and pressing record. What would be another strategy for somebody?
Yeah, exactly. First of all, I do both of those because giving a thoughtful response is one that personally I'm currently working on. So we're doing this together. But it will really depend on you and on your brain. So some people like to bounce it off with another person because even when they start writing, like they don't actually know, but when they have a conversation, then the person could ask them questions and then it becomes easier. So if you could do it with a friend, sometimes even a child, sometimes that's another one, by the way, like I put them a little bit together, but when you have to teach it to a child, then it makes it clearer and in simple language. Go ahead and do that.
Yes. Okay. That's so good. So good. And it makes me think of when I first started my very first podcast, I actually had on my husband because I needed him to ask me questions and process so I could keep going. And there's nothing wrong with that, having a co-host or somebody with you, a friend, to just process through as you're getting used to using that cognitive function, right? Because we all need that process of being able to practice. So that's good.
Yeah,
that's
I love that because that's like such a good example where you use a short-term strategy, right? Like now you don't need him anymore. Right?
Yes. I mean, I need him, but you know.
Yes, for your podcast in order to express yourself. 100%.
Exactly.
I'm not taking him away from you.
Exactly. Awesome. Okay. So, all right. So we have those 3 places of the input, the elaboration and processing, and the output. Okay. So we have those 3 areas. Is there anything else that you want to hone in on with that, with podcasting?
I think there's a big part. I'm sure you probably spoke about this, but I think it's really important to remember the concept of a growth versus a fixed mindset by Carol Dweck.
You can totally dive into that because I have not talked about it on this podcast. So yes, go for it.
So Carol Dweck was a psychologist in Stanford University and wanted to know what makes a person successful. And she researched many areas like sports and school and lots of things. And she discovered it has nothing to do with IQ, talents, background, or any of the above. It has to do with your mindset. If you have a fixed or a growth mindset. A fixed mindset thinks the way they are is the way they're going to stay forever. And a growth mindset is always learning, always growing, and like learning from their mistakes and trying new things. Now, here's the thing that most people don't always get super clear. Everybody has both a fixed and a growth mindset. If you think of something that you're good at, the only way you became good at it was by having a growth mindset. You practiced tons, you made tons of mistakes, you learned from it, and now you're good at it, and you'll probably keep on getting better at it. Something that you think you just can't do, and you're just like, oh, I just can't sing, or I'm not an artist, you have a fixed mindset about that thing. Now, the question is, do you lean more towards the fixed, or do you lean more towards the growth? When it comes to podcasting, what is it for you? Fixed or growth?
It's a good question. That is a good question, because I can say in my own world and coaching clients, when I hear somebody say, oh, I'm just not good at speaking, that immediately in my own life will shut me down and I won't talk. And then with other clients that have really struggled with using their voice, I can definitely hear either that fixed mindset or the growth one. And I love to dig into those little moments where they're struggling to get that voice out. And you can almost bet there is some sort of fixed mindset of, I'm just not good at articulating what's going on inside my head. And, yes. Okay. Keep going. I love it.
Oh, yeah. So if like one of my favorite ways to switch from a fixed to a growth mindset is language, because right, what you say and you believe is what your brain is going to come into. But don't believe in lying and telling yourself that you are really good at articulating yourself if right now you don't feel so. So changing your language just slightly will slowly move you towards the growth mindset. So instead of saying, I articulate myself really well, you could say something like, I'm learning to articulate myself better, right? Things like that is not a lie, because you're continuing to learn yourself, and your brain is actually going to find new ways, and it's going to be interested in learning what are other new cool techniques that you can use to articulate yourself better. Especially adding the word yet in the end. I can't articulate yet, right? It's like a magic 3-letter word. Is really good.
Yes. And my kids, they go to an awesome school, and they have ingrained in their brain the power of yet. And so they'll always say, yet at the very end. Right. I'm like, that's right. So yes. Okay. Yet is a great word. Like, our brains are pliable, right? So we can start to see hope there and growth.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. Right. Like neuroplasticity. Actually, the person that discovered these 28 cognitive functions, Professor Ruben Forrestein, back when he discovered them in like the 50s or so, people didn't believe in neuroplasticity. Like, it was a term already, but it wasn't very acceptable. And a lot of people like disapproved of his work. But to like the 1900s or even the early 2000s, like it became a thing when they're like, hey, you actually grow dendrites, parts of your, like in your brain, and your brain is changing. And then like now in the recent years, it's like, we actually grow whole neurons, not just dendrites. And people are like, no, it's not a thing. I'm like, yes, this pattern is repeating itself. So just know that no matter how old you are, no matter what diagnosis you have, you can always improve your cognitive function. But I think something that is very helpful and doesn't get spoken about enough is that every time you learn a strategy, you learn something that helps you in one area of your life, you want to see how you can spread that success to other areas of your life. So if you learn something at home, or you learn something while trying to grow your podcast, or you learn something while you're trying to revamp your branding in your business, whatever it is, try to take a moment after you've done a activity successfully. Okay, you just recorded a podcast episode and it like you feel good, it went good. Take one extra second, like literally, it doesn't have to take long, to think of what was the specific action that helped you do it well. Because there are a lot of little things that you are doing to record the podcast. You are getting your mic, you are taking out your notes, right? Like, did you write notes before? Or are you writing them afterwards, right? Like all those things. What that specific action, you then take that strategy and give that strategy a name. Okay, now, because remember, like I said in that story earlier, when you have labels, when you have names, then it's easier for your brain to understand it, to organize it, to remember it. So you give that a name. and you are going to, even listening right now, as long as you're not driving, open up a notes app on your phone and call it strategies. Every time you have a new strategy, add it to your list. The next time you feel like you are procrastinating, or you are feeling really overwhelmed or stressed or anxious or anything that you're like, I need to do something now, open up your strategies list, a list of strategies that, mind you, you've discovered yourself that work for you. Not that somebody else said, oh, you have to go and do this.
Good.
Something that works for you, and see which one is the best one that you can apply to this situation. That way you don't have to relearn these strategies again in this situation. You just like magically have it for you, even though you prepared it for yourself.
I love that. Oh my gosh, what a valuable tool. I think I totally am going to do that. I'm a huge notes taker on my phone, so I will for sure be putting that in there, because I love that, because I think we so often turn to others for strategy when we are our best coach and strategy expert of like, oh, I just recorded an episode. I love that. So let me pause for just a second and be like, what was the defining thing that helped me have a successful recording? Or what did I feel good about? How did that happen? I think that's really brilliant and such a gift for all of my podcasters that are listening. I'm thinking of people in my boot camp and my one-on-one clients. I will for sure be using that tool of write down what worked for you. What was it? Yeah. Beautiful.
Exactly. Now, for every person, right, like it's going to be different. And the key here is to get very specific.
Okay.
Because if you're vague and you're like, oh, I just did this, like your brain's not going to remember. Even now, obviously, as you do this for many months and hopefully years, you're going to have different types of strategies. So you might just say like, have sometimes like I made a plan, but you might be more specific in saying I prioritize, or maybe you even more specific and I time blocked, right?
Yeah.
So all of these can get like different times you'll feel like writing different ones, but don't feel like, oh no, I can't write this, because prioritizing is like planning. But different times you need different things. So make your list long so you can have different ones for different situations.
So good. Oh my goodness. I mean, I feel like we could end it right there, because that was just so good. I will say, if people want to discover more, because I know I'm like fascinated and totally intrigued by just our functions in our brain. And so if people wanted to come and discover more, I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that you have a cognitive assessment. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the cognitive function assessment is an assessment where you get to see on a scale from 1 through 5 how strong each one of your cognitive functions are. The biggest question I get when people take this assessment is like, but it doesn't tell me what's good and what's bad. That's exactly the point. Like we said, it's never perfect. It can always get better. By having a scale, you can then see, oh, this one's a 2 and this one's a 4. I probably should work on the 2 first before I use my 4. Or I could use my 4, I could leverage my 4 to help me improve the 2. So by just having good or bad, or strong or weak, like you're not getting it's not being very beneficial. So it literally just goes through the 20 cognitive functions, shows you what it would look like if it's weak, shows you what it would look like if it was strong, and you just mark down where do you think it is, and we'll give you a very good baseline to start seeing what you need improvement first.
Oh, so awesome and so helpful on every area of life, and not just podcasting, but it has been so helpful for podcasters who are struggling with procrastination. I mean, any entrepreneur struggles with procrastination. And so getting these tips and information on this is actually, there's 3 different levels of this cognitive function, and where specifically are you struggling, and how can we continue to improve or work on or leverage, like you said. I loved that, where there's not good or bad, because I think so often we can say, oh, I'm just so bad at that, or that fixed mindset, right? Where we can leverage those aspects of ourselves. And so this is so...
Can I share one story on that?
Oh, yes, go for it.
Okay, so I actually started improving my cognitive functions back in 5th grade when I struggled with reading, and tutors, whatever, wasn't working. So my parents gave me to improve my cognitive functions. Now, however, at that time, my mom would always tell me like, oh, your cognitive function of categorizations is like weak. Like it needs to it needs to be improved. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I know how to categorize red, blue, yellow, green, orange, whatever. Like I don't have a problem with that. So I didn't improve it. Now, what happened was when I got older and I was like, went to get training in this, I was like, okay, I want to get better at this for myself. And I want to like be able to tell my clients in this. So I went with the growth mindset, first of all, not the point of the story, but I'm just saying it was only when I had a growth mindset, I went to get training in this, that actually this cognitive function improved. And what happened is I then was able to change how I planned everything, because I was always the type of person that would plan everything the night before. Every single day, I was like super productive. Something needs to happen. I got it done now. The problem with that was I was so into getting everything done now, which I thought was really good, by the way. Okay. Everything having to get done now, that I couldn't think big picture. I couldn't grow the business to a certain level. I couldn't even I would literally do things like I would check my emails 100 times throughout the day and waste a lot of time like that. So I had this so-called weakness of a cognitive function of getting everything done now. After I improved my cognitive function of categorizations, I was now able to categorize tasks together and prioritize and see okay, this is later. And that was when I was able to start planning 6 months, a year ahead, and saved over 10 hours every week, which was crazy. But what I'm sharing with this is because of what you said about good or bad. Because I had this weakness, I now still have the ability to get things done. And unlike other people who will procrastinate on certain things, I'm very much still the type that will want to get things done now, even though now I have the ability to plan 6 months ahead. So even though beforehand I was wasting a lot of time by getting everything done now, I still have that strength. So your weakness in certain ways might be really good for you. You can just learn ways to use it even better.
That's beautiful. And I think it hits on too, the power of planning now, people who want to record an episode now, that's a great gift. And learning to plan ahead. I have most of my podcasters will have a 2023 plan by the end of our boot camp that I'm doing right now. And I am adamant about each of my clients having some sort of plan, because I was like that, where it was well, I'm just going to wing it every week because I just want to wing it. And I don't want to have a structure. I don't want to have a plan. But actually, when, like you're saying, when you start to harness both aspects of your strength and your weakness, it begins to really bring a wholehearted picture into it. You're using your whole brain and the strengths and weaknesses to really help you in the long run, which that was said so beautifully. And I love that you put that in there, because like I said, I think podcasters really struggle with that. Some are very much, let's record an episode right now. And that's great. You can totally do that. And let's plan ahead so we don't burn out, and we get to that place of the procrastination and I'm unclear. I don't know how to do the output. You start to go in this little slurry of malfunction. So yes.
Yeah, exactly. I always say you need to work with your brain, but you don't want to get stuck at where your brain's at.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, ST, for being here. And you have provided so much value, and I really appreciate you. And guys, I encourage you to go check out her website. Go check out her podcast, Life Picks University. She's on TikTok. Those are really fun to watch too. And so go check out all the places. She's amazing. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Hey, thanks for listening today. I hope that you feel encouraged and inspired to launch and grow your podcast. And speaking of that, I want to personally invite you, if you are thinking about starting a podcast or you're thinking about growing your current podcast, I have an amazing opportunity coming up in the middle of April, inviting you into our podcast boot camp. The first one is for new podcasters who are looking to launch and create their brand new podcast. And the second is going to be for current podcasters who want to grow and monetize their podcast. come check it out at www.kristinfieldschadwick.com, or you can find me on Instagram and send me a message and that you want to know more.